Hey everyone, this video is going to be all about Smartsheet Control Center, what it is, why it's crucial to any organization looking to do enterprise solutions or build an enterprise PMO. If this is your first time watching, my name is Michael Terrell, and I'm the founder of Fourscore Solutions. We are a professional service provider, and we are the 2024 America's New Partner of the Year. Hopefully this is showing up, but if not, pretty cool. Today's video, we're really just looking to deliver exceptional value for you out there, and Control Center is one of the more premier products at Smartsheet, and it has one of the highest learning curves, and we're just trying to make that learning curve a bit simpler today. So without further ado, let's dive in. Again, first and foremost, we are Fourscore Solutions. Like I said, we are that new partner of the year for the Americas for Smartsheet, but we do consult on other technologies. We are technology agnostic at the end of the day. We do resell a lot of these products that you see here. And we are a professional services provider, so we do custom implementations, help with user onboarding and adoption, and we work with a variety of industries, primarily mid-market and large enterprise, but we have clients in all shapes and sizes. Our goal is to provide simple solutions to complex problems. And so, just quick background on myself. Again, I've used a lot of these tools for a very long time, over 12 years, starting with Smartsheet since 2013. And I'm a former research and development engineer with several patents to my name, so we think outside the box, and again, have all the certifications to kind of show that we know Smartsheet just a little bit. But let's dive in. What is Control Center? Why is it important? Well, first and foremost, according to Smartsheet, if we just go to their website, what do they think Smartsheet is, or how do they advertise it? It's Control Center. Automate and scale your project portfolio with Smartsheet Control Center. Okay. And we can see down below, it talks about streamline team engagement, demand intake, automated provisioning, a lot of terms that might not make a lot of sense. But the big takeaway, which is kind of buried here, is automating project creation, managing change, and aggregating portfolio reporting. That's really what Control Center is in a nutshell. It's how can we automate creating brand new projects, especially projects at scale? How do we manage change when change occurs throughout those projects? Sometimes change that happens during a project mid-flight, but sometimes change that happens systematically for your project system just throughout the course of a year. And then how do we roll all that up for accurate portfolio reporting so that everyone knows what's going on at a 10,000-foot view? And one of the reasons why this is so important is because most people don't know this, but according to the Master Project Academy and Harvard Business Review, 27% of projects run over. They just have an overrun, 27%. And 1 of 6 of those projects can be a black swan event, meaning that you're seeing a cost overrun of 200% on average. Not just 200, it's 200% on average, and a schedule overrun of 70%. Those are massive numbers. And with that, can lead to significant financial cost. So down below, we'll have these linked in the description below, but you can see in this case study, a finance department approved the project 2 days after a deadline. And these 2-day delay cost the organization $37,000 in the study. So again, projects they tend to fall in this area where we miss deadlines, we're never on time, we're never on budget, and it can be due to lack of planning, scope creep, poor communication, insufficient processes, a technology issue. There's so many different things that can disrupt a project, and that you set a budget and you set a time frame to get it done, and you just miss it. And that can't happen in today's day and age, especially with all the technology that exists to help facilitate these issues not transpiring. And again, another Harvard Business Review study showed that only 35% of projects were successful. Now again, defining the criteria for success usually is that on time, on budget. So only 35% of projects hit that, which is a very low watermark. And so again, where does Smartsheet Control Center come into play? Well, again, in my opinion, it's probably one of the most powerful tools out there that actually lives by this motto of automating project creation, managing change, and aggregating portfolio reporting. And this has measurable impact into a business. So before we dive into Control Center itself, I kind of want to share a study that we did with one of our clients. And this organization ended up using Control Center, and they saw a significant return on the investment. So let's talk about that. This organization ended up making an initial investment of over $200,000 into Smartsheet, the Control Center platform. There were some other integrations to some of their other tools that they had already been using in addition to Smartsheet. But with that over $200,000 investments, the results were phenomenal. We ended up seeing almost $250,000 in benefits after implementing Control Center. On average, we saw that their time saved per project was close to 100 hours. The estimated projects per year this organization did was 55 projects. We calculated out that their average labor cost was $45 per hour. And they gave us a rating of 8 out of 10, which is pretty good. We'd love to be 9 or 10 out of 10, but 8 out of 10, we'll take it. And we saw an 85% adoption rate to the new system with Control Center. So overall, they saw $168,000 in annual cost savings, and this client and this organization got their money back in just over a year, which is pretty incredible. And so one thing that comes up quite often is, all right, well, that's a huge investment to make, and this project probably took 6, 9, maybe a year to implement this solution. Maybe I don't have the time to implement this solution, or I can't commit the resources to working on a project for this long period of time, even if the results and payback is only a year. Well, the good news is that this solution, even though it was a large investment, took 12 weeks from start to finish to launch the solution, with the actual core of the solution deploying about 8 weeks into the development, meaning that the benefits that this organization was already seeing to their project process started in a mere 8 to 10 weeks from the initial kickoff date. That's pretty incredible. And so we might be asking, like, how do we deliver these results so fast? How is that time to value so narrow? Well, again, our mission is to deliver exceptional value as fast as possible. And we do this with what we call the 4-score solution. So there actually is a solution and a methodology behind our name. And it really is 4 simple steps that we believe lead to strategic excellence and success. And so from our standpoint, we walk clients through these 4 steps. Every engagement where we locate and set the target. We want to make sure that our teams are oriented towards the solution in order to hit the target. So from our standpoint, we're going to spend, and we did spend, sorry for the terrible handwriting, not easy writing with the mouse, but we're going to spend 4 weeks planning, preparing, making sure that we got all the details right. As Abraham Lincoln once said, you give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, and I will spend the first 4 sharpening the axe. And we live by that motto. We really want to make sure that we're identifying the correct targets and that our team and your team are oriented towards that target first before we do any development work. Once we do that, we can move very fast in terms of building out an enterprise solution. So much so that the solution, let's try this again, that the solution launched within 2 weeks, and the remaining 2 weeks were spent on adoption training, making sure everyone had the right documentation, and just making sure that the system was functioning at maximum capacity. So that 4 weeks of prep can lead to a 2-week deployment, followed by 2 weeks of support, making sure everyone's adopting to the tool. And again, this 8-week period is crucial when we talk about goal setting and then scoring the bullseye. So with that said, time to value, 12 weeks is pretty incredible. And so let's stop talking about all the benefits and kind of showing all the benefits on why, if you're not using this solution, right now is probably a great time to consider it for 2025 to move your organization forward. But not everyone has $200,000 to invest in a massive enterprise solution. So, like I said, our mission is to deliver exceptional value. So we're going to try to at least hopefully provide half of that value. And let's see if we can give you $100,000 of just, hey, this is how Control Center works. Here's all the tips and tricks you need to know to deploy it yourself and save you some money along the way and kind of educate you on the value of Control Center. So without further ado, Abraham Lincoln also once said, the best way to predict your future is to create it. So let's go create something. So I always recommend just kind of going through the architecture of Control Center. Anytime someone joins our team, I kind of take them through this training. And so we're going to share this training with you all right now. And then we're going to get our hands dirty and we're going to log in Smartsheet and we're going to build out Control Center solution. So the first thing I want to cover is really just this key concept, is that if you understand this concept, you'll understand everything you need to know about Control Center. And that concept is simply data that gets input and then becomes an output. And for those of you who can't read that, it is input and output. I have a 4-year-old's handwriting. I asked my wife to do this and she said no. So you're stuck with my child handwriting. But that's it. It's inputs and outputs. And so it's specifically an input of data and information into SCC, or Smartsheet Control Center. You hear me say that term. And SCC is really just a standard template set. And so we have a Control Center template. This could be a collection of Smartsheet sheets, reports, and dashboards. We'll go through that in a moment. But it's just inputting data that goes into that template. And the Control Center will take that data and output it to a different source. That's it. This function happens at a macro level and a micro level. Each data point has an input that goes into the system, and then it has an output that comes out of the system. So this notion of inputs and outputs, that's all you need. That's all you need to know. So what does this look like in practice? Well, let's map out a very high-level process flow. Okay. Let's say we have some sort of initiation process. Some people call intake, others say initiation, kickoff. Maybe it's project planning or a steering committee, but there is some level of, hey, this is what we need to start working on, whatever that starting point is. So in our use case, let's say that people are filling out a form. This could be a paper form, this could be a web form, whatever the case may be. But there's some form that gets filled out, and that is our initial starting point from a documentation standpoint. That form gets sent to someone. There is a review / approval process of that document. And then that kicks off the project. So we get to the project starts. Okay. And there could be a bunch of things that happen. There's different team assignments. So again, our resources are allocated. So resource allocation takes place. Budgets are allocated. And maybe different assets are built to track the project. Okay. So we'll just say, well, basically project gets kicked off and there's a lot of steps that have to take place, right? So that's kind of our typical workflow, again, at a very, very high level. There's a lot more nuance that goes into it. So let's say we were building this enterprise-wide within a tool like Smartsheet. Well, our form can now be a web form, which can go to a sheet, which in Smartsheet terminology, you'll hear it called an intake sheet. That intake sheet can go through that review approval process. And then once it's approved, the difference here in our new Control Center environment is that Smartsheet Control Center will now approve and spin up or provision templated assets. So we may have a collection of sheets. So we might have a schedule, a budget log, a raid log. We might have some key reports, and even a dashboard that we want to spin up. And this is all connected as a template set. Okay, Control Center will take these assets and it'll provision a copy of it. And this copy will include all of the data to this new project asset. Okay. Not only that, anytime a user, let's get a new user over here. So let's say we have our little PM. He's just kind of meh about it right now. They go to work and they start adding data into this new project that has been spun up. Okay. That data can not only go back to our intake sheet, but that data can roll out or up into other resources. So maybe there's a portfolio dashboard. all the work that our PM over here is doing gets tracked in the project. Control Center automatically bridges this link between our different assets. It's pretty cool stuff. So at a high level, we have a process where data is collected at a form, drops into a sheet, it gets approved. Control Center spins up a schedule, a log, a RAID, a dashboard, and some key reports for that project into a brand new project that our PM can then add new data to, and that data can then roll up and out to our portfolio dashboard. And all of this is connected. So as new data comes in, it automatically syncs with all these different assets. Right? So it's very cool stuff. Let's go build it. So that's kind of the key core concept behind it. Now let's actually build it out. So if I share my screen back over here, let's look at some assets. So in the interest of time, not to make this the world's longest video, I've already gone ahead and built some very basic level assets. So we have a project management dashboard over here. We can see there's a project already in here. We see a couple sheets. And so let's kind of go through what we were discussing recently. So again, we have a web form where project information can get filled in. So we can go ahead and add some information. So this would be our initial data collection. So we're just going to call this a super cool project. And we'll say it's 100 hours. Let's say we're just going to start it today. Let's say this project is going to end by the 28th. So we fill out our project information. Again, you can use logic-based forms with this. So if there's different project types, again, you can have multiple blueprints, which we'll cover more in a second. But we collect our project information up front. Perfect. We've captured our project response. And again, we had that initial collection of data. That project is migrating to a sheet. So we have our input section up here. So let's go take a look. And here we go. So we can see our projects coming in. So here's our super cool project. We got 2 projects coming in here. Very cool. We see that initial data that we've collected from the form. Great. We have our form. We have our intake sheet, or in this case, our project initiation, where we're collecting that initial data set. So now we may go through some approval process to determine whether or not this project is approved. Okay, but we'll set that up in a second. All right, we're going to do all these connections here in one quick motion. What we want to make sure that we get right first, just kind of how I stated earlier, is that we set the target first of where we want to go. We make sure we're all oriented and aligned towards that target first before we just start building. So if I just go in and start building approval workflows and other assets, again, that may not be beneficial and can lead to what most projects have, which are long overruns, not only on the cost side, but just in the time component as well, which also impacts cost. So we have all this data. This is kind of our initial form of data collection, but how are we going to manage this project? What assets do we need? What sheets, reports, and dashboards do we need to standardize our project process? Well, let's take a look. We have our little project demo sheet here. We have a project dashboard. We have several sheets throughout admin, a scope and planning section, work execution, quality assurance, user acceptance testing or QA and UAT, and even solution documentation. So we can have all these different types of assets built for our project template to make sure that how we're managing this work, we have all the tools necessary to be as efficient as possible. We have a schedule, sprint plan, a RAID log in our execution section. And in our report section, we have different reports for burn down and what was implemented recently or what's our timeline look like. And then again, a dashboard to kind of summarize all these assets. So let's look at a few of them. We have a project dashboard here where we're collecting things like the project name, the description, when we're kicking off, what's the end date look like, a status update, who's on the team, what rate items we need to review. Then we can see things like what's past due or what's due in the next 14 days or what has already been completed. And again, what does our overall timeline look like? And then what does a burn down look like? You know, if we're tracking something based on hours or cost, can we do a chart where we're saying, here's our budget where we're starting, here's our burn rate, and here's where we're looking to go. With a lot of these assets, we might have a schedule. How are we going to manage all the different items that we need to do to get work accomplished? So we have a kickoff call with a list of activities. We can see some color conditional formatting to show when something's complete. We kind of gray it out and really just kind of break things down step by step on how we're going to manage this project. If we're managing it via a sprint, maybe we're doing that a little bit differently than maybe a traditional waterfall approach. So I can list out different statuses, sprint 1, sprint 2, and assign different milestones to it. And you'll see some different sections up top in terms of navigation and summary. And we're going to go through all of that in more details, why these sections remain. And then we have a raid log. So if we need to add new raid items, whether something's a risk, an action, or issue decision, we can just add rows in here. These rows possibly can come from a form too, but we can track, again, any risk or any decisions that are critical that we need to monitor along the way. And so those are kind of just some of the core templates that we're using here. So we kind of have a project management system. We have our toolkit here with a couple different critical sheets that we need to use to manage our work. And so now what we want to do is we want to connect this data. If we go back to our dashboard, we want to see, all right, well, who's working on it? We want that to auto-populate because every time this package gets spun up, we want all this data on here to be dynamic. And as we can see with some of our reports that are linked to that schedule already, as the schedule gets filled out, this data is collected through here. So we might want to know across all our projects, what's our percent complete? How can we compare, contrast these things easily, or especially on a burn down, we have only 52 or 42 hours remaining. These are things that we're going to want to see up front. So we have our form, we have our sheets, and we have our template of assets ready to go. Cool. We're ready to build Control Center, but not so fast. There's one other critical template that we recommend, and this is what we'd call Abe's pro tip here, to build out for every Control Center build. And that's going to be what we call metadata. A lot of people in the industry can call it a metric sheet or their metadata as well. And it is essentially an admin sheet to track all of your data throughout your templated process. And what I mean by that is in Control Center, to connect data, it looks for data points underneath a parent row called summary. Any children row underneath that become your data points that you want to connect. Okay, I'll say that again. You look for a parent summary row, and any child data points is what is going to be connected through Control Center. This is what would be called profile data in Smartsheet terms. And so what we're looking at here is a sheet that says we have project ID, company, project name, all these different data points. And we can see the source over here is intake or our project initiation sheet. So we can see project ID as a column, we can see company as a column, and so forth. So in metadata, we are pulling data over, or at least we're building the foundation to pull data over. So project ID, we are saying is going to be a text number field, and we want project ID to be linked specifically to this text number cell. Company name, same thing. It's coming from intake as a source, and we want it to go to the text number cell. Now for some of these columns have different property types. So date, contact, multi-contact, a symbol column, which we're just calling health in this example. And for each of these, we're looking at where those data points should be mapped. So estimated start date, we want mapped in the date column because it's a date field. And we can do this for every single data point we have within our project template. We can take our source, intake, which is our input, and then we can take other inputs. So again, back to that example we drew earlier, it's all about inputs and outputs. So where is data being inputted? Well, we have certain data that's being inputted directly in intake as the source. Other data, like data that might come from our project schedule, that is the first input of that data. So it doesn't actually happen upfront in intake. It can happen within the template itself. And we can collect that data, and all of our intake data and all of our scheduled data or any data from any other assets can now be rolled out and outputted to different sources for reporting and analytics. Okay, so metadata we just set up as a separate sheet. Now you might say, well, what if I don't want to use metadata? I still want to pull data in, but I don't want to have a separate sheet to manage it. Well, you can still do that. If you look at the sprint plan here, you can essentially build a mini metadata sheet just for your specific data that you want to see on a given sheet. So in this example for my sprint plan, this is set up so that every time a project is spun up that uses a sprint plan, we'll have a navigation section up above, and we'll have a summary section so the user can just see right in the sheet what this project is. What's the ID, company name, who the contacts are, who the team members are, what the client team is, all of it right on the sheet. So again, This data can be linked to the dashboard, but if you want to see it in the sheet, well, you can just link all this data directly to the sheet and basically have a mini metadata section within your plan. Again, we're going to cover some more examples on like why you might want one versus the other. I would say typically we don't recommend having summary information on the sheet if it's needed. Totally makes sense, but as you can see these grayed out cells, if you want the data mapped to the appropriate property type, then you want to have columns associated with that. So contact column is a contact property instead of a text number or some other form. Doing this creates what I like to call a hopscotch approach of your data, where you're kind of reading left, left, skip 2, oh, there it is, left, skip 3, there it is. So you kind of just hopscotching all over the place. And just sometimes it can be hard to read. So in certain situations, you might have a schedule sheet where you're already using hierarchy quite a bit. And by hierarchy, I mean having multiple parent and child rows, being grandparents and so forth, where having a summary section isn't going to be that big of a deal because you're already kind of using a hierarchical structure. But in other things where you might use a RAID log, well, maybe you don't need a hierarchical structure. So what I mean by that is you might not want to see that summary section just take up space. You could just see the core data that exists underneath. And so for that, you may want to use sheet summary. And so instead of having the information show up on the sheet, you still want it on the sheet, but you don't want it taking up potentially valuable real estate when working with this data. So by using sheet summary, we can put summary information about the project in the side toolbar, which is pretty cool. On top of that, the side information we may also want in every row of data. So a lot of times from an analytics standpoint, you might want to know how many projects have a risk associated to it, or how many projects have outstanding decisions for this. Well, you can have that hierarchy structure set forth, and you can do different custom formulas to say, hey, I want to put project name within every cell, index match, index collect, whichever you prefer. Or, again, this is another pro tip here. If you are using a metadata sheet, you can just use a formula that links to your metadata to pull that data in and convert it to a column formula. And so again, when we get a little bit further along and we actually provision a project, we'll see how this comes into play, how beneficial this can be. So we can do that either directly as a formula. And again, when we write formulas, another pro tip, we always write the sheet name first, followed by a vertical bar, followed by the either column or cell property that we are referencing. And so if we look at Project Manager, though, you could also just have a formula that references your sheet summary as well. So if we were to edit these cells really quick, we can see this is just a simple edit of a cross-sheet reference. But if we look at this one, it is actually a reference to sheet summary. So we can reference that data in our sheet, but don't have to take up real estate on our sheet to do the calculation. Okay. So again, we recommend using metadata. It just helps kind of consolidate what data we're collecting, what data we're outputting, and if there are any errors in the system, it's very easy to follow the breadcrumbs back to see where the error may exist. So it's easy to quickly correct. Again, another way we can deliver value quicker is just by building the trail of breadcrumbs so that if and when things break, you can quickly find what the root cause is and resolve it right away. So this is great. We have our sheet, we have our form, going to our intake sheet, and we have our template with all of our assets built together. Cool. Well, now we just need a place where we want to output this data. Where do we want to send it all after it's done? And here we have a project summary rollup demo sheet here, where it's just going to output all of the data that we're collecting. And so the way I like to think of this is we're just going to take our metadata and we're just going to transpose this, because even in metadata, it has that hopscotch approach. And so really what we want to do is say, hey, this is great. I'm glad I have all this data within my template. I'm never going to go to this sheet and look at it. How can I see one place where I can have a master record or summary row of all my project data? And that is project summary rollup. We're going to basically transpose all of that data in metadata and convert it to a master row in record for us to use. Okay. So with that being said, this is the moment that we've been waiting for. We've kind of set the target. We're going to be building out a PMO system. We have our template set. We have our intake of what it's going to be. We have our output of data. We kind of know how we're going to build it. We're going to leverage metadata to kind of collect all this data. So we're oriented towards that target. So now we can go step by step and actually build out Control Center and see all this value that this solution can provide. So for those of you who might have skipped ahead and are starting right here, I'll try to timestamp this and make this the key point where we actually do the Control Center demo. So let's do it. So we're in Smartsheet Control Center. For those of you who haven't logged in before, usually it's going to be in your bottom left launcher under Control Center. If you're new and for some reason it doesn't show up, you can always just go to controlcenter.smartsheet.com. After you log in, it should bring you into a view like this. If you're an admin, you can go to Manage Program, and we are going to build a brand new blueprint. All right, so here we go. So blueprint, at the end of the day, it's a schematic. It's just, here's where the inputs are going to go. Here are the assets that those inputs are going to come into. Here's where we're going to collect all this data, and here's where we're going to output this data to. That's it in a nutshell. Again, if you can master the input to output concept, both at a macro and micro level, you will be golden with Control Center. So blueprint name, we're going to call this, let's call this Abe's Amazing Blueprint. And again, a description we can put in here. So if there's any details, again, if you have a lot of blueprints, this can just give you more insight as to what particular blueprint you're looking at. Another pro tip, another Abe pro tip here is there isn't a really great changelog that Smartsheet offers for Control Center. So we recommend using this almost as like a changelog. So we can say 125.25. We'll say blueprint is created. Okay. And so what we'll do is we'll allow users to pick where they want their projects to go. But you can pick a new workspace for each project. So every time there's a new project, there's a new workspace. As we get to the end of like permissions and sharing on the back end, there's some tips and tricks we'll provide there on like what's the best practice. If you are using new workspaces, again, that's going to be pretty critical. If you're using a pre-selected workspace, permissions and sharing at the end doesn't need to be as robust of a setup because you might end up doing some duplicate stuff. But you can do pre-select workspace, you can have users pick a workspace, or you can have someone select or create a workspace. Again, for our demo, we'll go through select and create so you can kind of see a little bit of all these options, whether we're picking one or creating one from scratch. All right, so that's it. Step one done in Control Center. We're off and running now. So we want to pick a source folder, and this is going to be where all our assets live that we've built. So simply put, we just want to navigate to our template that has all of our assets. So I have this project demo, and so Control Center is going to bring all these assets into the tool. And so here we go. We got 18 assets with this tool, quite a bit. And what we can see here, we got our dashboard, we got some reports, we got all our different sheets that are coming in here. And one thing you'll notice right off the bat is everything's included by default. If for some reason you have some assets that you're working on and don't want to pull in at this time, then great, you can just turn off those assets and not include it during the initial setup. So I do recommend it. It is something where if you are building assets, you don't have to build it in a separate place. You can build it within the workspace and just when you set up the blueprint, only include what you need to include at that time. One thing you may notice as I move my mouse around here is you might see this little launch button pop up. This is kind of letting you know like, hey, if we were to build a hyperlink for you, what would you like that hyperlink to go to by default? And so in this case, we're going to use the project dashboard, our first asset here. So anytime a new project gets spun up, we'll have a link to dashboard column, and that link will be a link to this project dashboard. Now, one thing you'll notice with reports are always required by default, but we can also make some of these templates optional. So if we look at this, we might say, for some of these projects, the sprint plan, we might mostly do waterfall, but we may not do sprint planning. And because we're not doing sprint planning, we may not use this feedback and request log, and we might not use our QA plan. Okay. As we start making some things optional, some of these items can be grouped together. And so we might just call this sprint items. And we can just assign these all to that same group. Okay, so as we're provisioning new projects, we can come in here and we can say, hey, I need all the sprint items. Let's include them. So those are assets. So we've got all our assets that we're going to provision. This is our kind of templated, standardized process that we're going to repeat over and over again. Okay, so with Control Center, there's always different components that you can enable if you so choose. We're going to enable all of these with the exception of resource management. So resource management by Smartsheet is a separate product add-on. We're not going to cover that one in this video, but we are going to cover intake sheet, summary rollup, dynamic scope reports, as we call them, or dynamic report scope, but you'll hear me use the term DSR, what we call dynamic scope reports, and then WorkApps as well. Like I said, this is Smartsheet Control Center, all of it, everything you need to know. So we're going to enable these two components, and we can see we have way more components popping up here. So intake sheet. So we're going to go find our intake sheet, which is our initial input up above. So I know it's called initiation. So look for project initiation and pull in our intake sheet. If we wanted to add multiple intake sheets, we could absolutely do so. So again, it really depends how many projects we're running through. As it shows here, 2,000 active projects, or sorry, 20,000 active projects. So if you have a large amount, it may make sense to split it up into multiple intake sheets. A lot of times if we're running different project types, we may also recommend multiple intake sheets. For our example, we're just going to go with one intake sheet. Okay, so our project name column. Well, when we're looking at projects to provision, what do we want to look it up by? Probably the project name. Project approval. What's going to determine that a project is approved and ready for Control Center to provision all these assets for us automatically? Well, again, we're going to go with this approved question mark column. It's a simple checkbox column. Again, for demo purposes, we're making it nice and easy, but I would say in a more robust setting, in a more enterprise setting, this is where using Smartsheet automation and having an approval workflow set up. And then once that workflow has been completed and it's been marked for approval, whatever that approval step is, that can be your value that triggers a project being ready to be approved. So again, we're making it nice and easy. We're just going to say, hey, if our approved column is checked, it's ready to go. And how does Control Center know that, hey, we've provisioned a project, we're done, and this is the prevention of duplicates. So otherwise, Control Center could just provision the same project over and over and over again. So we want to have some backfill where we say, hey, once we're done provisioning, we're going to go in and just mark something or just tell the system, hey, we're done, and that you don't need to re-provision it again. And so from our standpoint, we're going to use this SCC column or Smartsheet Control Center. Again, another checkbox just to make it nice and easy for us. And once Control Center is done provisioning, it'll automatically check this column off. And then where would we like a project link to go? Well, we have this link to dashboard that we mentioned earlier, so we're going to put the project link right in there. Advanced options, so attachments. Do we want attachments that may come in from this initial row? So any other documentation or supporting evidence that's been collected. So if this is more a steering committee that is reviewing these assets, they might want to send those assets into the project template for the PM team to start using. So we're going to say, yeah, you know what? We want these assets to go to our technical requirements sheet, and let's also send a copy to our schedule as well. If we wanted our projects to be filtered by a current user that's in a particular column, so let's say the project manager was provisioning these projects, then when they went to go provision it, they would only see the projects that were ready. It would be ready for them to provision that they're assigned to. So if we had 50 projects and I was a PM and I only had 5 projects assigned to me, if I were to manually go into Control Center to provision those projects, I would only see 5 projects in there. I wouldn't see the other 50 and then have to sort through them. Again, for our example, it doesn't really matter if we have it enabled or not, but I'm going to turn it off for our example. And then additional filters. So again, if I wanted to filter it down by, you know, a particular, let's say a particular phase that the project may be in, or again, really the better example is going to be project type, maybe company as well. So if I'm looking at different companies that are running projects and I want to filter those data points down, you can get up to 3 filters when we're manually provisioning projects to say, all right, here's how I want to narrow down my list of projects that are ready to be provisioned. Okay, so we've named our blueprint. We've told Control Center, here's where our template of assets will live. We've let them know here's where the input of initial data is going to come into play. And now we're ready to profile data. Here's where the learning curve skyrockets on the Smartsheet side. And it doesn't need to. It seems like a lot, and it is a lot at first glance, but Once you get over this hurdle, Control Center becomes a breeze. This is probably the most challenging section of Control Center that everyone has a hard time adopting to. So we're going to try to simplify this as best we can. All this section in profile data really means is where, again, if we go back to our process flow, and maybe we'll do that in a second here, it's that input into Control Center. You know what? Let's do that. Just so we have that. There we go. So it really is, we're going to redraw this image again of inputs, and then we have SCC, and then outputs. Okay, it is this section, this arrow right here. That is profile data. That is all you need to know. It's just saying what information from our inputs is going to go into our templates, and where is it going to go, and how is it going to go, and all that fun stuff. So again, when I said at the very beginning of this, inputs, outputs, you understand this concept, you're golden in Control Center, it's true. Because at a macro level, Control Center is taking inputs into a template and provisioning outputs. At a micro level, it's setting up for each data point. Where is this data point going to be sourced from? Where are we inputting it? And where and how are we mapping it into the template? Which eventually will lead to where and how are we going to map it outwards. Okay, so let's go back to our template here. And so in our profile data selection, all we want to look at is we have 27 fields that have been discovered. That means we have 27 fields that are either in our intake sheet or are in a template or within our template. Now the key here is if we look at some of these, we see sprint plan and we see metadata, and we see for all of them, with the exception of start date, end date, and kickoff meeting, have our project initiation intake. Okay, well, if we were to look at our assets ahead of time, we would see that, all right, project initiation, here are all my different columns. And so if I were to go approved all the way to my last column, risk, and I go back to Control Center, I see approved all the way down to 24, risk. Okay, so I see every single column is a data point that's been collected by Control Center and is showing up in my profile data selection. If I were to look at sprint plan and metadata, because we can see for the most part, most of these data points are either located in the sprint plan or metadata. Well, how is it pulling metadata? Again, it is that parent summary with the data points listed as a child for that parent summary row. And so we can see here, we see 20 data points coming from intake. And then we see another 5 data points coming from our project schedule. So we got health, start date, end date, kickoff, % complete. Okay, let's go to the sprint plan. Okay, summary, we have 16 data points coming from intake, and we have another 5 coming from our project plan or project schedule. So if we go back to metadata, we see the same data points. And if we go back to Control Center, we can see that of those data points that are connected, the common thread is that if we look at project ID, they both live under that parent summary row as a child data point. So all Control Center is saying is that we have a column called project ID, and within our sprint plan, we have a child row called project ID that's under our parent summary row. And we see the same thing in our metadata sheet. Therefore, if we wanted to map project ID from intake into our sprint and metadata plan, we can, because we are seeing an appropriate match. And if we wanted to add data points, we can add data points. But by doing some of this work up front, again, identifying the target and setting it, then orienting ourselves and aligning ourselves towards that target, we can have Control Center just automatically pick up all of our data points. Now, if we miss something, then we're just going through this. We're looking at each data point one by one, going, all right, This data point is going to be input in intake. It's going to get dropped into the sprint plan and dropped into metadata. That's it. We just ask ourselves that question over and over again. And once we see mapping here, we can see like update date. Okay, well, that's not in the sprint plan. Status update, not in the sprint plan. Maybe it needs to be, or maybe it doesn't. If it does, we have now followed the breadcrumbs back. Okay, update date is not in the sprint plan, because if we go to the sprint plan, we do not see a child row called update date within the sprint plan. Okay. Again, this is where the learning curve shoots off, and this is where things get confusing. But if we just go back to that concept, input template, we'll be all right. So our next section is customizing this data. I have identified a match between the two, but now we need to customize it. So how are we going to do that? Again, we got 22 data points in this example. With a lot of solutions, there's hundreds of data points. So again, we set the target up front, orient and align. Control Center can take a lot of the work off our plate for us. Otherwise, we might be going through hundreds of data points to get this set up correctly. But in short, the first question is, we have a field health, and it's how is it being populated? Is it a value from our intake sheet, or is it something we're going to enter manually? Well, maybe it is something we're going to enter manually. Maybe for health, it's going to be, well, we're going to pick a different field, but let's say company can be a text, and let's say project manager is a contact list, and let's say phase is a dropdown, and we'll edit some values here. Okay, so we'll just put a couple values in here. And so we'll see once we provision the blueprint where these fields come into play. But essentially what we're looking at here is that the data is already being mapped as like, hey, this is coming from our intake sheet. Again, maybe we want to enter it manually. Let's say it's coming from intake. Well, we can already see for all of our templates, if we look at the advanced settings by going to the triple dots and saying show advanced, we can see that sprint plan and metadata are already checked by default. Meaning we've already done the mapping up front. So Smart Control Center is already recognizing, hey, we're good to go. We know that our data in intake is going to show up in the sprint plan and metadata. Now we just need to tell it, where do we want that data to live? So we're saying health should go to some mapping of a health column. So again, field name mapping is always critical. We can always change it if we wanted to, but saying, hey, health that comes in intake, we want to match the health row as such. And this data can be a one-time write, it can be an editable value, or it can be a cell link. Now we'll make it an editable value. Actually, we won't, not for this field. This field we'll keep as a cell link because we're going to do something different with health. But let's take project name and we'll make it an editable value, one-time write. Again, it's just going to write it into our template, and that's it. It won't be linked. If we want to update it back at the source, it wouldn't pull over. But let's say we want to change it because it's a little misleading what editable value is, but we'll do that with project name. And then for these other fields for health, what's the target column? Well, we can leave the target column blank if we want to map it to the first column to the right. Okay, so by default, target column is always going to be the first column to the right. So if it's project ID, we don't have to say map it to text number because it'll just going to write it to the first column to the right. Same thing in our sprint plan, just going to map it to the first column on the right. So that's why this like mini metadata sheet within a template is critical. If you have an asset where we're not leveraging these resources, and let's say these columns exist all the way to the right, well then it'll just map it to this ability statement. So under your summary section, if your first column isn't text number, it's contact, you may have an issue writing data properly into that cell. So another reason we kind of recommend using this kind of hopscotch approach, and more so in metadata than in an actual working sheet, is so that we can accurately place data in the right column property type it belongs to. So in Control Center, we can say, hey, our target column in this case is going to be a column we call health. And if we go down our list, we can see contact here. Okay, so I'm going to just turn on advanced for all of these. And again, we can see left, right that project ID showing up in these two cells, target column. If I wanted to, I could pick text number. And again, when you're picking the target column, it's going to pull in every column from every asset that you have. So we're going to go. There we go, text number, but I don't have to. Just like link to dashboard, again, that's going to go in a text number column. I can just leave it blank. Both of these are going to do the same thing. And again, we're field mapping name to name, and we're going to keep the behavior a cell link. But for something like contact, I would like this to go to a contact column. So in metadata and in my sprint plan, I have a cell called contact. Same thing with my date columns. I have a column called date, which is just a date property type. So we're going to go select those. Project manager, we're going to send that to contact. And team member, we're going to have multiple team members, so we're going to send this to a multi-contact. And we're going to do the same thing with client team. And we'll just do update date really quick, because that's going to go to a date column. And that's it. So if we look at metadata, we got 2 contacts, 2 multi-contacts, 3 date columns. And again, this is all for where the values are coming in from. So again, another key thing to remember is that where are these values coming from? They're coming from the intake sheet. And so this is a direct match to our source. So all we're doing is using a sheet to kind of map what Control Center is looking for. And again, this is just part of laying the breadcrumbs down as well. So now that we've mapped all of those fields are good to go. If there's specific profile data or a template that we wanted to add in, we can add that as well. So for instance, if there was data that we wanted to pull in from different sources, target and cells, again, this is specific for specific templates, we can add those additional data points as well. In all honesty, we don't really recommend that approach just because it's far easier within the template to just move something over from the macro level sheet. But if we wanted template specific profile data, we could do that. Okay, WorkApps. So WorkApps is kind of a cleaner user interface on Smartsheet. So for enterprise portfolio systems, again, having these massive solutions, you want simplicity in terms of engaging with it. And so we're going to build that out too. So we're going to put our WorkApp URL link directly to the sheet. We're going to say our project owner is the project manager. And then our team members, they're going to have a just particular role within WorkApps. And our project manager is going to have a role. Our client team will have a role as well. And we'll get more to roles once we go configure the WorkApp side of things. But our columns and anyone entered into those columns will then take on the responsibilities of the roles we set within WorkApps. All right, summary sheet. So first and foremost, we can build multiple summaries from Control Center. And so at an enterprise-wide system, if we are doing different project types and we're running hundreds or thousands of projects a year through the system, sometimes it makes sense to say, hey, this is our project type A summary or project type B summary. You can always roll up that information together, but having project data rolled into specific functions makes sense just in terms of scaling the platform. It may not be project type also. There's a lot of times we've done it where the analytics that we roll out of a project from a summary standpoint, we break across multiple summary sheets. So for instance, one might be more focused on the schedule and timing. One might be focused more on cost and budget impact. And another one might be focused on particular KPI metrics that we're tracking throughout a project. So if there's a lot of analytics we're pulling, instead of trying to cram it all in one sheet, sometimes we break it up into multiple summary sheets where we can just consolidate and centralize what the main output should be of a system within one summary or multiple summaries, depending on the use case. Okay, so let's build a summary sheet. Again, you can just click Add New Summary Sheet if you want a second one. but we're just going to do one. We have our project summary roll-up sheet. And again, our data sources. So you can see here, it pulls all of our sheets that we selected initially. And so any data that we want to output, we can do. So instead of having metadata, if all of our sheets had this mini summary section with data that we were collecting specifically for the template that we were looking at, then we can tell Control Center to say, hey, I want to pull data from the sprint plan and metadata, and maybe the same data exists in our project schedule. And then we can say, all right, well, we know some information is going to be duplicative. You know, Control Center is going to take our project ID, for instance, and it's going to input it in our sprint plan, and it's going to input in metadata and somewhere else if we have these summary sections set up. So what we're going to do instead is say, hey, instead of knowing when this thing outputs, if someone wants to follow the breadcrumbs back, where do you want them to go? So a lot of times you might say, oh, well, have them go to the sprint plan. And that's where the primary data set. So even though intake will end up adding it into 3 places. So if I just draw on here really quick, we have our intake sheet. And this data will actually map into the schedule, into the sprint plan, and into metadata. But only what we mark as primary for only the data points that are in all 3 of these will map out. So let's say in the project schedule, we have some waterfall analytics that only exist in here. That data will roll up as well. Okay. And so for our standpoint, we're just going to use metadata. Again, another pro tip and benefit of metadata is that if you have one sheet where all your data points are collected, you don't need to worry about pulling data sources from multiple sheets. If you have multiple sheets, you have multiple assets you have to go then review if there are errors or something comes up in the system. Might be harder to resolve. With one metadata sheet, you can go right to the source. And what we can see is as we selected metadata, we can't even turn off these checkboxes. They're checked by default because it already found an automatic match for us. Now, if there's a data point that we wanted to add that wasn't connected, then we can just check off, kickoff meeting if we wanted to add that data point to it. And then as we finish building out this blueprint, Control Center will actually add that column automatically to our summary roll-up sheet. For our standpoint, we'll leave it off, but just know, like, again, setting the target up front, doing all this initial legwork up front, we can see everything's getting connected right away. If we wanted to create a hierarchy in our summary sheets, so again, let's say we are doing one summary sheet, but we wanted a hierarchy by project type and group different rows together, we could do that. So if we wanted to group our rows by company, and then maybe we group it by the client team that's at that company, or like a key stakeholder, you can do that in the summary sheet. So you get auto hierarchy generated. Again, for our example, we're going to keep it simple and leave it off. Depending on analytics that you're doing, may or may not make sense. Can really go either way depending on your use case. Intake summary is another great benefit where we can take data that is within the system, like within our template, and actually send it back to our intake sheet. So the input goes in and the output goes out, but that out could actually be a reverse and send data out back to where it originated from. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take data from our metadata sheet, because that's primarily where we're collecting this data, and we're going to send data back to metadata. So we'll just select company for now, and then we'll go back and change it. There's a better example we can use, but we'll demo it after we build the project. Okay, so we have our data collected in, goes into the template. We're rolling that data out, and now we want possibly to build a dynamic scope report. And so essentially what this report is for any of you who have been working with Smartsheet reports, there's really no great way to just dynamically change the sheets in scope that you're looking at until now with Control Center. Speech has been around for a little bit. Again, highly beneficial feature that helps organizations scale and provides further automation in their processes. And so essentially what it is that anytime there's a new project that's built, we basically want to collect that data. So we got a couple reports that we've built. We're going to add 2. And again, we call them DSRs. And so for one, we want to look at the project schedule, and for another, we want to look at the RAID log. And we can include multiple templates too if we wanted. But essentially what this will do is that anytime a project is provisioned, our report, or sorry, our sheet that's within our template will get added to a report that lives outside of Control Center. And anytime we archive a project, that sheet will get pulled. So if we have a report, for instance, looking at open items in our RAID log, we spin up a new project. That new project doesn't have any active RAIDs, but someone adds a risk to it. That risk automatically shows up on a report, and that report's probably linked to a portfolio or PMO dashboard somewhere. Now no one has to go say, hey, I've spun up 10 projects. I got to go find that report and add 10 new projects to that report scope. Or for those of you who might know the workaround, if you just look at an entire workspace, the problem with looking at an entire workspace is that A, all your projects have to live within that workspace, which might not be scalable, especially if you're sharing with multiple audiences or external users. And B, you look at the report and it might have 2,000 sheets that you're looking at, but really it's only impacting maybe 100 actual sheets of data that you want. So the performance may not be as quick as you'd like. And this solves for all that. This allows you to quickly, easily, as new projects come in, sheets get added automatically. As projects get archived, sheets get removed. So you're always looking at the latest and greatest data through your dynamic scope report. And from a naming convention, if we want to name our projects a certain way with a prefix or suffix, this will rename all the items in the blueprint: sheets, reports, dashboards, folder, workspaces, you name it. So if there's any key data points you want, you can do multiple. So if you wanted to do the ID followed by the project name, you can do that. The one thing I will say is that it is a one-time write, so it doesn't dynamically update the name. So our recommendation is usually just include the ID, but not the name, because we work with a lot of clients where the project name changes over time. What ends up happening is your asset names don't change, so you either have to manually name them later. Again, you can apply different naming rules to the workspace and folder. So again, if you want to do the ID here and then the name in the other one, because it might be a little bit easier to change the name of a sheet rather than all the folders and naming conventions that go along with it. Totally up to you. In our case, we're just going to keep the prefix with the ID. All right, almost done building the blueprint. So everyone who's an owner will be a lead. Project creator can be an admin or an editor. Again, it just depends on who's provisioning in Control Center, what access rights do you have. Typically, owner and admin for the first two is usually a good starting point. If you're doing workspaces, pre-selected workspaces are already built and users are already shared through that, maybe via a group or shared to the workspace directly, then you may not need to use the sharing section at all and can leave it blank. If you're doing multiple workspaces, then this is a good way to just have users get access to those projects directly. For some users, though, or a group, if you have a particular group you want to share, you can share a specific permission, maybe editors who can't share, to specific templates. So if I know our Smartsheet team only needs access to the sprint plan, I can share that direct access to the sprint plan and not the other assets within the plan. And again, you can add multiple levels of this if you need to, or you can just do it for all assets by default. Okay. For our standpoint, since it's just myself demoing this for you, we're just going to leave all this blank, but just know you can do it on an individual level, and those users will get access to those items. And that's it. So we're going to go ahead and save this off. Control Center is going to do its thing. It's going to grab our intake sheet. It's going to grab all those templates. It's going to grab the output sheet. It's going to grab our 2 dynamic scope reports. And now it's just going to connect everything together for us. And so while it's doing that, let's take a moment to say, if you like this video, if this is super helpful and you're getting some value out of it, I know it's a long one, feel free to give it a like, subscribe, comment below. It really helps us out. And yeah, just appreciate you taking the time to watch this. From here, we'll go through actually provisioning a project. And then we'll go through some change management, how we can do some updates to the system globally that affects both new and old projects. We'll talk about automation, how we can automate the project creation process. And we'll talk about archiving. So we can see as it's wrapping up, it's fetching integration links, And boom, the blueprint's been created. All in all, you'll see, you can check how long that took. Not very long. And we're going to open the work app here. So again, if you're using Control Center, you don't have to use Portfolio WorkApps. This is just a way for a cleaner user interface. So we're going to go set this up too pretty quick. And then we'll provision our first project. So here we are. We're in Abe's amazing blueprint. We're in Smartsheet WorkApps. We can see all the different pages. These are all the assets that are pulling in. And if we want to update this blueprint, we can go ahead and update it. But first, we're going to make some configuration changes. We're going to do that by going to Roles. And we're going to go to Project Owner first. And we're saying the project owner, when they come in, we want them to see the project dashboard. That's going to be the home view. If we didn't want it to be the home view, let's say we wanted this timeline report to be the home view, whatever's the top gets this little home icon. That's the first thing that's going to load. But for our purposes, we're going to have the dashboard load. Let's have our feedback and request sheet load, our project schedule, and our rate log. Okay, and we'll just do this for a couple other roles. So the project manager, they can view, let's say, those same things. We'll just match it to the project owner. Let's say for RAID, we'll give them editor rights there. And let's do the same thing. Let's say our client team, so someone external, they probably just need to view the dashboard only. And our internal team members, we want them to view the dashboard. We want them to provide any feedback, but we just want them to view the schedule, see where we're at, and view any rate items that have come up. Okay, if we wanted to add more roles, we can add more roles if we needed to. Other than that, our roles are updated with the particular views, and we're going to apply a quick theme. And we'll get some logos applied. And there we go. So you can pick a logo, you can pick a banner, thumbnail, a bookmark icon, and then even an accent color for our work app. So I'll just apply some of those really quick. Again, we can see different page settings as well. So if we look at different assets, so let's look at our feedback request backlog. Again, we can see our different assets over here. And again, if we wanted to change some of the settings where it's a grid view or card view or mobile view, or if there's a default filter we want to see within the work app, again, all that can be customized via page settings within the work app. So we're going to go ahead and update the blueprint. And it's going to apply those changes. So great, we can go and say manage blueprint in Control Center to bring us back into the Control Center view. And one thing we'll do here is we'll go to our home work app page. And cool, in Control Center, we can see our blueprint is ready to go. So to provision a project, we just mark our project for approval. We'll actually mark both of them in this case. And then we can go back to Control Center and we can say create new project. We see our brand new Abe's amazing blueprint. We can see our optional templates showing up. And we'll go ahead and provision the sprint plan. And we can see all of our required templates as well. And so here we'll go ahead and create a workspace. And we'll call this Abe's amazing workspace. And we can see our filters that we set up before. And we can see our projects. So we'll go ahead and pick our first one, is amazing Smartsheet Control Center solutions. And as we go down here, we can see all of this data is already linked up front. So we can see some of it's read-only. So like in this case, project name, it's not showing a link here. That's because it's a formula. It's column formula. That's why we're not seeing a link here. But our work app, that's going to become a cell link. We can see company. So if we just said test ABC, project manager. So again, we can pick different PMs. So again, I'll select myself so we can manually add data in here. Now for one of these, I want to say it was company. I want to say we made editable value. For others, it's just pulling directly from our intake. So phase, we set a drop down with those 3 values. So we'll say this is going to start in discovery. And again, this is like further picking profile data. So some data is coming from our intake sheet, but again, maybe we want a different input. Maybe we want the input coming from our submission up front here. Again, we did a form to a sheet. You don't even have to do an intake sheet. You could just say, this is your intake sheet and this is your start of the process, and just kind of skip that initial mapping steps that we did. Again, we can see the workspace. We can see who's getting added to that workspace by default. And we can see our editors, viewers, if we wanted to do it on a per project level. So again, in the blueprint, we can say, hey, for every project, here's how we want those assets shared. But if we're going to manually provision a project and we have different types and different workspaces, then maybe on a per project level, we want to set up who we're going to share to. So if we're picking for a particular template, we can do that per user or per group, specifically for the project we are provisioning. And then we can also send an email notification to our shared users saying, hey, a new project has been spun up for you. So everyone knows new project's ready to go and you can get in and start building. So we're going to go ahead and say create and let Control Center do its magic. And let's see how quick it is. So while it's doing it, we can see that we're copying the template source folder. So the first thing it does, it's going through the blueprint that we just built. It's saying, hey, we got it. We got the data from intake. We got our source folder for our template. We're going to make a copy of it. We're going to take that. We're going to build out new folders. We're going to build out new assets. We're going to start moving those assets in. Again, if we don't have any data within a folder, if we don't have any templates that we're not going to use, so those optional ones that we didn't select to bring forward, we're just going to remove them from that template. And now we're just going to start updating all the information within that field. Everything from intake, any input we made during this creation process. We're going to build that folder, provision those assets. We're going to update our summary report, so rolling out that data. And then we're just going to do a quick QA of just make sure there are no errors and no issues during the provisioning process. So we can see we're already finishing, and boom, project's ready to go. Now we can see unable to update profile data, health, in row 25 of sprint plan because the target column health could not be found. So that tells us that if we were to go to our sprint plan, the target health column health couldn't be found. So if we go to metadata, we see there's a health column here. Input, or intake, we see a health column here. But if we go to our sprint plan, there is no health column in this sheet. So when you set a target and you don't have the health column, it's going to error out. Or what it would do is just write it. Again, if you didn't have a target, if you didn't put target health in and you left it blank, it would just write health directly into a text number cell. So in this case, it would just write green in. But because we specifically said, go find a health column, and we don't have one in sprint plan, it errored out. So again, when these errors occur, it's going to lead you, again, based on the design, based on how you set it up, it's all about design intent. It'll lead you back to where the error occurred. Okay. And so we can also see there's another error here. The project work app was created but failed to publish because the portfolio work app must be published first. And so all we need to do is go to our work app here, and we can see the project, but the portfolio side is not published. So let's go back and let's publish it. All right, we have our portfolio. And all right, here's our amazing blueprint. Cool, this one's ready to go. All right, so this is real life troubleshooting. We're going to keep this in the video. I'm not going to edit it out. Basically, this is part of multiple blueprints in the same blueprint. Sorry, multiple blueprints in the same portfolio work app. And so once at least one page visible in these other two, we're going to go fix that really quick for our two other demo spaces. And so we're just going to go to a role in here, make this a viewer, update this blueprint, pick on this role, make this a viewer, update blueprint, and then we come back here. And now that these are done, we'll do a quick refresh and we should be able to publish the blueprint. Bam. And we publish the portfolio and all is right with the world. So there you go. Some real-time troubleshooting as well. A little bonus. So we're going to let this publish the portfolio. And while it's publishing, we're going to go back to our project and we're going to open our project. So let's take a look at our new project assets. And while it's doing that, I'm also going to say update reporting here. Another pro tip, if you're ever having any issues or connection links aren't working, sometimes just clicking update reporting, or if a link's been removed by mistake, just come back to Control Center, open your project, hit update reporting, and it'll refresh a lot of those links. So we're going to let that run. And here's our project. So we can see we got our ID, we got our project dashboard, we can see the naming convention, we can see a lot of data points that have started to pull over from our template. And if we were to go into our sprint plan, we can see a lot of data that's been copied over. So we see cell links that link back to our initiation or intake sheet. We see our one-time write for our test data. We see another one-time write. Now, granted, some of these are editable values that we selected. And that editable value just means, hey, you can edit it in Control Center. So if we were to go back to Control Center and we say edit project information, we could come back in here and say, all right, let's make this design and say update. But we are editing these fields. We've just changed the source of the field. Whereas for those of you who are familiar with cell links, if I were to go to our initiation intake and make a change back here, so as you can see, we have those changes from Control Center happening in real time. But if I were to make that change all the way back at intake, and let's do that right now and say the contact for this first project is myself. And again, a couple things you'll see here as we save, we can see our SCC is checked, saying Control Center has run and built this project. We can see a link to our dashboard has been provisioned as well. We can see our company name has been linked back in from metadata from our template set. All these things happening right away. And so as I add some hours to these things, we see some formulas running. And if we go back to our project dashboard in here, you can see those changes we made from our intake sheet are now updating within our project sheet automatically. Again, didn't have to go build a bunch of cell links. Control Center created all the links for me. And depending on where I make those changes, that data is connected throughout. If I go to our summary rollup and do a quick refresh over here, we'll see a master project record row come through. Here we go. All our data cell linked in one master record, and all the changes that we've made back in intake or back from the Control Center view are already updating throughout our system. Pretty cool stuff. Even if I were to go into our project and say go to our project schedule, and if I were to make changes here that affect our percent complete, those data points would roll up as well, as they would up to the dashboard. We can see our changes starting to sync through here as well. All right, so if we go back to our work app here, and we go into our project, we can see our project is now live. And we want to go to the live portfolio link. So we're in our portfolio view, and we can see all of our different projects across all our different blueprints, but we're going to primarily focus on Abe's amazing blueprint. We can see our branding start to take over with our logos. We can see only a few assets pull through. So if I'm the project manager, or I'm the project owner, again, we can see the assets that we selected to either be viewable or editable. So the project dashboard comes through. If we went to the RAID log, we can add a RAID item in here. So we can just say something like very risky. And we can say this is opened. And we can say this is due by the 28th. So we're adding some RAID items in here. Let's set a priority and a severity. Again, some of this stuff would happen automatically depending on different automation rules that are set up. So you only have to fill out very little information. But again, we can edit this information in here, and we can go back to the dashboard, and we can see this information automatically rolling up to our dashboard, which can then begin to roll up even higher. Now, with someone on the client team, though, I would only have access to the dashboard. So it can be shared to the work app, or again, if we're not using work apps, it can be shared to the workspace. And then based on my role, I would only have access to what is shared to me. And so that is all determined through here. So if I had a client, Abe at Fourscore Solutions, based on them being in the cell, they get that role within WorkApps, and their permissions are automatically set. So hopefully it's starting to make sense where we're doing a lot of upfront legwork of determining who belongs in what role, what assets we need to have, who's going to work in what, and then ControlCenter is just saying, hey, as long as you put people or data points in these places, we're going to connect all the dots for you and make sure that the legwork of making sure people have the right permissions or people can work in the right places and see the right information that's already taken care of for you. But what if there are changes? Again, projects come in flight, it's approved, all this stuff gets created, that's awesome. But what if we have a ton of changes to the system? So we're going to close out some of these tabs up here. And we're going to go back to ControlCenter because our blueprints, good to go. But there are changes that we want to make. Well, same thing. We come in here, we edit our blueprint. And again, if we wanted to do a change, again, this could be revision 2.0, and we just put changes in here. Again, obviously we want to describe what the actual changes are. But we have our demo, and you know what? We're going to just make things required because we're just going to simplify. All right, we're going to make this system so efficient that everyone has what they need to. So again, by making some things required, we've already done connection on different data points that we want to connect over. We're going to look at project name. Again, that's going to be text number, but we don't want it to be editable. That's going to turn into a cell link. And you'll see why I'm making some of these changes. We're going to provide more automation so we can go quicker and faster with these things. Company name, same thing. That's going to come in from intake, and we're going to link that to our company field, and that's going to be a cell link. And again, our phase, that's a drop down. That's going to come from intake as well. We're going to link that to the phase field. Okay, so all these things are going to be super automated. They're all going to be cell links. We're all mapping them in the appropriate places that they need to go. Okay. And what we're going to do for the sprint plan, we're going to add the health column. So we're going to go to the template because we're going to do some change in flight. There's a better way to do this, but we're going to show you the manual way, more common way. And so we're just going to add a health column, and boom. That's going to go right here. And boom, there's health. Okay. And okay. So there's our health column, and now it can map appropriately to the cell in our sprint plan. Again, not the best design, but just showing what happens where we saw that error, and here's one way where we can correct it. So we go back to Control Center. Our roles are still connected. Don't need to make any changes here. Our dynamic scope reports are connected. We'll take a look at those in a minute. Or sorry, our blueprint summary is already connected. Don't need to make any changes there. Intake summary, if we want to link data back in, we already got company linked. So we're good there. Like I said, dynamic scope reports are good, naming's good, permissions are good. So we can go ahead and save this. So quick change on the profile data front, where we're just optimizing it a bit. Because let's say those steps to create a project, hit that button, pick all those different fields. It's like, hang on, if I just make everything a cell link, do I really need to go through the steps of selecting the right projects and picking the correct spaces? And the answer is no. We can make it so that you set up Control Center, and it's just there. It's for the admins to monitor, make changes when you need to. But for the most part, people working in the system, work in Smartsheet, they input new project requests, they get approved, templates get provisioned right away, and you don't need to go to Control Center in order to provision those projects. Right, so we're in that last step. Any last integration links, blueprints updated, our changes have been made, and we are good to go. And we're going to make one more change that I just realized that we need to make. Again, just in the effort to simplify. We're going to have a pre-selected workspace for us, and that is going to be our Abe's Amazing Workspace. So we're just going to go through, not going to make any other changes. Everything else is good to go. So we're just going to click next through. Control Center will just load our data set just to make sure, hey, you can quickly eyeball this stuff. Project Manager, glad I did, because Project Manager is going to come from intake now too. And we're good there. All right, so one more quick save. Then we're going to turn on automation to make this process even quicker. Once we have automation turned on, we'll provision another test project, just so you can kind of see how quickly we can spin up a project via automation. And then we'll talk about project archiving, and then we'll probably talk about the roll-up of data a bit more, and then we'll talk about archiving. Again, you're still hanging in there with us. You're the boss. That's awesome. We're covering a lot. Really appreciate tuning in. Again, like, comment, subscribe, helps us out. Especially comments. Let us know what you like, what you dislike, so we can be better and provide better content for you. But we're going through all of it. I mean, this is everything you need to know with Control Center, so you can just take it yourself and just provide a ton of value to your organization. So we're going back to our project list. And again, before, if we were to create a project, this is what I mean about some of the manual provisioning steps, where you're clicking a blueprint, picking which templates you want to go. If some of these things are just the same process over and over again, and you don't need to make these selections, then we can go and turn on an automation and say, hey, this is the same thing over and over again. We just want to automate Abe's Amazing Blueprint. And so we turn it on, and now our process is completely automated. So we're going to go look at the logs here. And what we're going to do is go back to our intake and say, hey, you know what? Our project is approved. We've gone through our process. There's been an approval workflow, and this project is approved, and it is ready to go. We're going to save that off, and just by clicking approved within the system, back over in Control Center, our automation will recognize that approval's been met, automation's turned on, and now those steps of manually provisioning the project, clicking the blueprint, determining what templates we want, editing any of that profile data, or just reviewing it, picking the workspace potentially, and picking the right project. Determining permissions, all of that, all of those steps, again, if defined in the blueprint and it's consistent and repeatable, can now be automated, and Control Center will just provision the project for you. And so we'll keep checking the logs here. It does take a second, especially the first time setting up automation. But again, we're just doing this live, so we're just going to let it run until it runs. And so we'll just do a quick refresh, see if it's pulling through. Again, every time it provisions a project, rule of thumb, it is pretty quick, but 2 to 5 minutes, I'd say, is kind of a reasonable expectation. Sometimes it's quicker. It does depend on the project size and how many assets we are trying to provision. And so we'll refresh this one. So something that happens, another pro tip here, is you're running a project for the first time, don't have the project already approved. So we have to re-trigger the approval here to make sure it picks it up. So we're just going to try to force that through. And so once this thing triggers, we'll let it go through and provision the project. Hasn't grabbed it yet. Again, the first one's always the slowest anytime we're building it from scratch. Once the automation picks it up, future projects are a lot quicker. So we'll do a third project as well so we can see that. Another tip just on the logs. Sometimes these logs aren't dynamic. So if you're sitting here waiting, the screen can sometimes time out on you, and you just have to close the log out and then do show logs again to see if it's actually running anything. Okay, still isn't picking it up. Just gonna try to trigger it again. Okay, we'll see if it picks it up this time. Third time's the charm. While that's running, let's talk about the roll-up of this information. So we have a dashboard up here. Again, pretty basic at the moment. And so we have our data collected. So we can see a little chart, myself listed. We can see our intake, so our input, which would go into our project template or demo folder. And then it gets rolled out to our summary roll-up of information. And we got a form to add new projects here too. So all this is kind of connecting right away. But let's say those dynamic scope reports that we had. So we can see below that these reports, and we'll open one of them up. We can see that there's one sheet in here, and it's the project schedule that we provisioned via Control Center. So this new sheet was added to this report. And based on how the report's set up, it's pulling in the data automatically based on the columns and filters and grouping that was set up. And so as new projects come in here, these new projects, the new data that's being worked on from within those projects will sync up to the reports. Okay, so let's go back our Control Center log. And we're still not picking it up. Just going to make sure that the project is showing up in here. Yep, FLO2. So it is picking up in here. So there it is. So we can see it's already creating. So again, promise you, didn't hit create. We'll go back to the automation logs. Again, that first one is always the longest. Once that one triggers through, we can see in progress via the automation. So our super cool project is going, and it'll kind of walk you through the different steps there. Again, we'll do a third one, and we'll see that it's much quicker after we get through that first one. But we can see it's in progress, pulling all the different assets. If we go to our initiation sheet, let's do a quick refresh here to see if we can see some of that data pulling forward. Yep. So again, still working through, but we can already see some links going out to metadata. We don't see the dashboard link yet, so that tells us that we're still in progress, building out all those different assets. So we got links going to metadata, and we see it wants us to refresh here, so we do a quick refresh, and bam, there's our project link. SCC has been checked automatically. And we go back to Control Center. Let's go back to the logs really quick, and boom, we see super cool projects completed. We see it was completed with errors as well. And we see there's an error on our intake summary because there's a circular reference link on our intake sheet with the company, the column company. So again, company is now a cell link. It's not an editable value. So most likely I forgot to turn off intake summary for company when I made it a cell link, because now it wants to do a circular reference. It wants to create a link from intake to metadata and a link from metadata back to intake. Hence the circular reference, hence the error. But we can see our project link right here. And we can see our project dashboard come through. We got our title renamed up at the top. And if we go back to our intake sheet here, we can even see our link to the work app is now pulling through. That's now that we've officially published the work app, we're pulling this link over as well. And we can go right into that project. And if we want to work on our schedule, we can go right to our schedule, or if we wanted to go to our raid, we can work on the raid. And again, I'm a team member, so I can't edit the raid, but if and again, the reason you see me being able to switch between roles is because I'm essentially listed in all of those roles as the project owner. But if I was only a client team, I wouldn't have this ability to switch this view. This option wouldn't exist, just for the record there. So if I'm a project owner and I go to the raid log, let's add a raid item in here. And we'll just add a big decision needed. But it's not that big of a priority. And it's not that severe. But it is something that I need to work on, and it's open. We'll open it today, and let's say it's due today as well. Okay. And so as I make these changes here, if I go back to my project dashboard, we can see those changes reflect on our raid log up here. And then if I go back to our PMO dashboard and I refresh this page, we'll see that the raid update that we made on our second project, now we're seeing the second project up front here, but we're seeing the decision roll up here as well. Okay. And so there is one error where we're not seeing project name and description pull through. So let's do a quick analysis on that. So we see our project name coming in from intake, roll up, used in different formulas on the rate and schedule. So all our links and metadata, again, following the breadcrumbs back when things aren't working, is always great insights where it's like, okay, well, project name and our IDs, these aren't connecting properly. So what's going on? We see it's supposed to come in from intake, goes out to our roll up, and we see the formulas or connections that it's used in. And I can just follow the breadcrumbs through the cell links directly. And so we take a look here, and it is linked properly to the field. So this should pull through correctly. We'll just do a quick refresh. And we do see it is linked out to metadata. So this information should be going to metadata directly. So we can always view it backwards, and now it's showing up. So again, Scout's Honor, I haven't paused it and kept this video wide open. All I did was just look at metadata, check the link back one way, check the link the other way, a couple refreshes, and it's pulling through. If I go back to our project dashboard, it's now pulling through on the project dashboard as well. All right, so let's do one quick thing. Let's fix our company update. In order to do that, we need to disable automation first. So we're going to disable automation. You must do that in order to edit the blueprint. Automation's enabled. You'll just get an error message saying, hey, automation's enabled. Please disable the blueprint, or please disable automation prior to editing the blueprint. We're just going to go through. We know exactly what the error is based on that error message. And so we can go right to blueprint summary, intake summary, metadata company. That's creating the circular reference. So we can remove that. And again, in the interest of everyone's time, we're just going to remove intake summary. But again, you can use it for other fields as well. So we're going to save the blueprint. This will eliminate that error. And so changes are going through all the different templates. And so what we'll do is we'll provision a third project, and we're just going to let automation run in the background. And while that third project's building, we'll take a look at how quick it is too. We'll do a time study for that third project, but we'll go through archiving. So we're building new projects, we're building new systems in, but now we want to be able to take projects off. Again, this is where the scaling factor comes in. And so we're going to go back to automations. We're going to turn on automations. We're going to go back to our intake sheet. And actually, let's go to our dashboard because we're going to submit a new project. We'll call this really fast provisioning. And again, we'll set Justin here as the PM. We'll say this is 200, actually, let's say 600 hours. And let's kick this out a few dates. Okay, so we've got a third project going into our system here. And so if we go back to intake, again, form, going into the sheet, we refresh. There's our new project already in the system. And then we're just going to go ahead and say approved, saved, and we'll let ControlCenter do the rest and build out all of these assets. And while it's doing that, we'll do a time study to see, but just know that we're at 5:55, and let's see how quick ControlCenter changes that check. But while we're doing that, we're going to go and build a new archiving rule. And so to make things simple and easy, we're just going to call this demo archive. We're going to pick our blueprint, Abe's amazing blueprint. And it's going to look at our summary roll-up sheet. Again, if you have multiple, you can pick the primary one that you want. And you can pick different conditions. So we can say where health is a certain status, let's say phase is equal to a particular value or contains a value. You can even have something as simple as like archive is like a checkbox or true false. But for our purposes, let's just do phase. And let's say phase is equal to archive. From here, we can say, what do we want to move our project? So all those assets, if we just want to move them out of workspace and move them to an inactive workspace, we can do it. So we can say we're going from workspace A to like a cold storage workspace and just move them off the list. We can remove all project level sharing, disable any alerts, actions, or automations that take place. Anything that may be published, we can just disable. So we're not worried about sensitive data leaking out. We can freeze any inbound cell links and formulas so that data doesn't actually just change due to a broken formula. We just freeze what the final results are. And then we can remove those project sheets from dynamic reports. So we're just going to do this one just for our demo purposes. If there's any profile data that we want updated, we can update that information. So let's say we want health to become gray just automatically. We can just go ahead and update that different data. And we can add more data too if we want certain changes to happen when it's archived. And then we can move the rows of data. So really, this section of archive is our template. that is our SCC template. That's the provision project. What do we want to do with all those assets? What do we want to update within them? But then we still have the initial input of data into those assets in our intake sheet. And then we have the output of that data in our master summary row, whether it's in one summary sheet or multiple summary sheets. So here we just have one and one, but if we had multiple summary sheets, we'd see multiple sections. We can move those rows to other summary sheets, maybe a summary archive sheet. We could delete those rows if it's no longer relevant, or we could just freeze and lock those rows. And so what we'll do in both those cases, we'll just freeze and lock. Usually don't recommend deleting. Some processes make sense, especially if we're moving data along through the process and that data is no longer relevant from the initial standpoint. And then moving to other sheets, again, it's like moving it to a cold storage, just so we have some reference off of an active sheet that a user may be looking at. So we'll go ahead and create our archiving rule. And that's it. The archiving rule is created. Now, the one thing with archiving, I will say, is that it is something where if we look at archiving, it shows you all the rules that we set up, and you want to perform archiving, it is a manual step. So you can't automate archiving to say, hey, our project has hit archive, take it off the list, because once it's removed from Control Center, it's not coming back into Control Center. So we really have to be careful about when we move things off, because it's a lot harder to bring it back. So typically, think of archiving as like, we're never going to work on this project again. We have all the data that we need from it. We're just moving it to cold storage so we can reference it. Okay. So we're coming back to intake here. We see our refresh button come up. So we'll just do a quick refresh. And there we go. All our data is connected. Let's check in Control Center really quick. Let's go to our automation. Let's check our logs. And so we see really fast provisioning, done, completed, 0 errors, 5:58. Let's double check it. When it checked this off saying it was done, 5:58, so 3 minutes. Think about that. We took a whole set of templates, copied it over, and again, let's open it up. Let's make sure there are no errors in here. Control Center said there wasn't any errors, but let's confirm. Sometimes it can be wrong. And so we see our template coming over. We see our sheets have been renamed. If we go to our metadata sheet, okay, we see it's not pulling that data over again, which is always super fun. But we see it is connected, it is linked. So if we just refresh this data set, we'll take a look at this side as well. We do see it's linked to metadata. So again, 3 minutes, we're 6 minutes in. So most likely it's just taking another minute or two to pull in. But all the assets have been provisioned over, which is really incredible. If we are adding different changes to our setup, if we're changing time periods, if we're saying these things are not done, and maybe this is in progress, but this hasn't been started, and these things are not done. And we say that this is today's date. We'll update our timing. And we'll just add a quick action too. We go back to our dashboard. We do see the RAID pulling through. We do see metadata is now pulling through. So it's just taking a little bit longer than usual. When I go back to the dashboard, it's now pulling through on the dashboard as well. And if I go back to our PM dashboard at the top, rolling everything up, we can see Justin's information's coming in, 3 active projects. And then if we look at our dynamic scope report, we can see the new project has been added in with the new dates and timing and the new RAID actions, all within 3, 6, 7 minutes, depending on some of the metadata errors. Very cool. Very, very cool. But there's even more value here. Like I said, if you're sticking with us, really appreciate it. Like, comment, subscribe, because we're covering every single bit of Control Center, trying to brain dump as much knowledge as we can for you. So I appreciate you hanging in there with us. Let's say we want to archive a project. So we're going to go to phase here. And we're just going to add archive as a phase. And we're just going to archive this very first project. We'll hit save. Now, what I want to call out is that this is going to dive in all the way through to our summary rollup. So we see our summary rollup. We see all the different data points that we're collecting. We'll go ahead and refresh this. And we can see all the data points that we're collecting throughout our process, all rolling into summary rollup, which can then roll up to that PMO dashboard. And so what we want to see is that, actually, I think for our first project, phase is not linked to the intake sheet. So again, another reason why, if you're doing the editing, you may not want something like phase that's connected to intake, which it is, but in our use case, this is connected to ControlCenter. So if I come back to ControlCenter here and I go to edit our first project, and we edit project information, we can see phase is now linked together. But before, if you go back earlier in the video, you'll see that this was a dropdown with only a few values. So when you're making some changes and they're doing some change management, you always want to have a system of record, whether it's in that blueprint list or in another Smartsheet list, of what changes you're making, why you're making it, and what the potential impact could be. In this case, we change an editable value to a linked value, and all of our older projects are not linked because they were provisioned under the editable value. So what we're going to do in this scenario is we're going to go to this project, and we're just going to change it in our metadata sheet. What this is going to do is we're going to go to our summary sheet, and we're going to see phase up here for design. This is going to switch over to archive, which is now going to flag this project for archiving. So we go back to Control Center, manage program. We go to archiving, and we're going to click on demo archive and say perform archiving. It's going to find our projects, and we simply check it and hit apply. Now Control Center is going to go through all the archiving steps. We're going through a freeze event. If we pick move, we'd move it. If we pick delete, we would delete it. And it's moving all our assets wherever we need to go. If we said we're not going to move it, assets are just going to stay where they are. All of our cell links are going to get removed automatically as well. So we don't have to worry about anyone updating or removing an item that they're not supposed to. So we're going to let that run. It's going to make all those changes for us. And what we'll see on our dashboard is in our DSR report, which actually, nope, you can still see it for now. It's still running, is that our first project, amazing SEC solution, and our very risky RAID item. Again, these are still open, but technically these would be closed before we're archiving a project. But if for some reason we had an item that was still open and we archived by mistake, well, it's going to remove these items from this report. So again, when we're archiving, we want to make sure that we go through our assets and clean up any of the project work that we're doing. And so if you look back here, we can see that this project is archived successfully. Again, very quick. And if we go back to our dashboard and refresh, we will see that those project assets that are connected to our dynamic scope report are no longer present. So we got a really fast project and our super cool project here, and our risk is gone. Pulled it right out. So you're always looking at the latest and greatest information within Smartsheet. Okay. So what if there are bigger changes that we need to do? We're in flight, we've launched this system, it's cool, we're off the ground running, but there are bigger changes that we want to make to our tool. Well, we can do that. We can do that via global updates. Global updates, we can add new columns, modify any existing columns, add new profile data. So if there's new data we want to map into the system, we can go ahead and add that new data that we want to map. If we have maybe a misspelling, or we want to add a formula or tweak a formula, we can do a find and replace to just switch some data points around. If a terminology has changed, if company we want to now call client, we can make that change just by finding and replacing different text. If we want to update different reports that are within the template, or update particular dashboards in different views, we can do that as well. So we're going to walk through a couple of these. Probably the biggest one is adding profile data. So we're just going to add a profile data of, we're going to call this a risk flag to the blueprint. And so what we're going to do, let's go back here. So apparently the Smartsheet headers are down. Well, first thing I'm going to do anyways is I'm just going to add a column into our intake sheet that's called risk. Okay, so we're just going to add a simple risk flag, which is a simple checkbox. Okay, so we're going to save this. Again, there's a refresh there, so we'll see our project intake here. This row's been locked due to the archive, so we are all set over there. So if I come back, we're going to say add profile data, and we want to add that risk flag. We got our blueprint. And we're going to refresh Control Center. The joys of live demos. All right, there we go. Now it's pulling through. When in doubt, refresh. All right, so we're going to add a risk flag to our blueprint. We're going to add it to the source template in all other templates for all future projects. If it's not in our summary sheet, we're going to want to add it to our summary sheet, so our roll-up summary sheet. And then we want to link this from intake to our particular project sheet. So since we added that column to our intake sheet, there's our risk flag. We're going to say we want to see this in our metadata sheet. So if we want to pick a target column in the template, we can do that. And we're just going to leave it optional for now, which means the risk flag is going to just get pasted in that first column to the right. Now, technically, because it's a checkbox, we would prefer to have a column in metadata that was a checkbox column. That's where we would prefer to add it. But again, simple true false. So going to text number is just fine. And then we're going to want this to be a cell link. So we're going to say create and run. And so anytime we're running a global update, it's going to want us to do a test first. So we'll do a test on our most recent project. And there we go. We see the test was successful, and it opens and creates a test sheet for us so that we can review it. So we're opening up our test sheet. We can see risk down here below, brand new profile data that was added. So that looks good. It's added it below to our summary section. So we're happy with that. So we're going to hit confirm. There's our field risk. There's our template metadata. It's partially validated. And now we're going to hit apply. And we're going to apply it across the board. And we're also going to apply it to our base template. So again, we added a column to our intake sheet. And now we're adding it as profile data throughout our entire system. And we can see success. It's been connected. So if I go to metadata here, which is our template, and do a quick refresh, there is our risk column. Now again, if I want to move this for future projects and say, yep, I want this to be an intake, I want this to be down here, maybe I do want to add that column, that's a checkbox, and remap it. Again, you can do that for future stuff. You can use other global updates too to accomplish this. So like we could do some things like that, just an organization. But for older projects, again, it's just going to go right at the bottom. And so we can see success. It's mapped it over. And so we can look at metadata, and here it is. Risk mapped right here. Linked in from intake, rolling out to our summary rollup for our most recent projects. Okay, so if I come into this project and say our third project is a risk, we'll save that over. And we'll kick that data from intake, so it's coming in. Now it's showing up as true, so true, false. And it's pretty cool. So we're just connecting it right in where it needs to go. But let's say we want to make a change. Let's say we want to make a few more changes, right? A few more global updates because we don't want it to be true. Right, so we click OK with this global update. And we're going to add a new one. So that's adding profile data. But we decide, you know what? I do want that column. So we're going to add a new column. And it's just going to be the checkbox column. We're going to add it to our blueprint. And we're going to add it to metadata. And so simply put, we're going to create a new column. But if you already created it in the template, then you can just use an existing one from the template. But we're going to build it from scratch. We're going to call it checkbox. And it's going to be a checkbox column. And we're going to use a formula for this instead of a value. So we want to link this, if we had a new column, over to our risk field. So let's say I wanted to do like equals the text number field. All right, it's pretty simple. I can just copy that formula in here. I could test the formula out if I wanted to. Again, it's going to provision a sample sheet for me to work with based on where I want the formula to go. So here's my formula test sheet, so I can test out however I want it to work. So again, let's say it's going to manually do this. Checkbox, checkbox, cool. We say equals text number. Okay, it's coming through as true. Still true. Let's say I want to change it to a risk flag. Let's say I want to do a bigger formula. We could say if this equals true, 1, 0, boom, there's my formula. It's pulling the flag over that I want. Cool, love it. There's my formula. Come back over here. Bam. There's my formula that I want to default for that column cell. And I can only write this, only write to cells in the summary block or metadata section if I want to. I can lock or hide the column. I'm going to have it get placed right between my health and source section. And we're going to say create and run. So same thing, going to apply that test to our most recently created project. And there we go, there's our checkbox. Okay, so it added the column. Looks good. Again, not a fan of the sizing, but again, it's just auto going to add these things in. So some of those controls on sizing, you're not going to have in global updates. But overall, that looks good. So we're going to go ahead and confirm. Shows you the position. Shows you everything else. And we're going to say apply update. So when applying update, we get to choose if we want which projects we want to update and if we want to apply it to the base template or not. So we'll go ahead and say apply. Again, it's permanent and not reversible. So always be wary of that for all global updates. But now we're going to add it to everything. It's successful. All projects have been updated. So we can click on our most recent one and we can see our new checkbox column in there. We'll go to metadata. And there it is. Okay. So our formula didn't paste over in the checkbox. And you can pick the style too. That's another drawback. If you're doing checkbox or symbols, it doesn't let you pick which style you want. So definitely for like adding a column, there's some testing that has to be done for the formula. I don't believe I checked that only right to cells in the metadata section. I might have missed that. So definitely with the rule, once it's applied, it isn't reversible, but we could always run a find and replace. And so let's do that. We can say find and replace to update formulas or text. We'll call this the risk formula. We'll go to our blueprint. We're going to go to our metadata sheet. And we can look at some advanced options. So again, right now the cell is blank, but we also know it's kind of 0. And we're going to replace it with our formula. And we're just going to do it in our checkbox column. We're going to replace the entire cell. And we're just going to say that this cell is blank. And we are going to add a condition where like the row itself is profile data so that we know it's connected to other sources. of information. And so we're going to say create and run. Same thing. We're going to apply the test to the most recent project. We're going to open our test sheet. Okay. So there we go. Our formula is now in every single cell in here. Again, we already manually pasted in here with the cells, but we can see the other ones where in this one, which is the real one, these are all blank. So our test one has the formula. So the find and replace worked. And we can say confirm. And we can apply update. And same thing. We're going to apply the update to each project. If we're doing multiple projects, like massive projects, again, our rule of thumb is always you apply it to the same project you tested. So you test one project, and you go for production. You do production for the same project. If it all looks good, batch 5, batch 10, batch 20, before you do all of them, just to be sure you're not running into any issues. Okay, so now we have that data connected. And so let's say all this data we now want to see on our dashboard. Okay, so we want to see if a project's at risk visually on our dashboard. So we're going to call this risk. We're going to go to our amazing blueprint. We're going to pick our project dashboard. And so with dashboard changes, there's no builder to make the changes itself that you want to see. So you're going to want to make the changes on the template first, and then you can test it out. So that's what we'll do. So we're going to go to our dashboard here. That's in the template. We're going to edit this dashboard. And what we're going to do is we're going to move target end date over. And we're going to move kickoff meeting over. And we're just going to make a copy of our health widget. Looks like we need a little more room. And we're going to paste a new widget in here. And we're going to change our data source. And we're going to go right to metadata. And we're going to pick our risk field here. Okay. Let's do that again. User error. Okay. And so we're going to turn off the title. We're going to change our font down. We're going to call it risk. We're going to change our colors. Maybe we're going to make it nice and red. And we can increase the font just a little bit. And then for our dates over here, we'll adjust these two. All right, so we'll save this data. Now we can see it's a checkbox here. Not a big fan of the checkbox look. So again, with some of these changes with global updates, again, like the style, for instance, on that checkbox column, can't really change. But for future projects, you can always just go in and pick the style you want and make any other changes that you see fit, like rearranging the order of profile data. So we'll go ahead, we'll change the style, and we'll see the style pulls through to our project. And then we can go back to Control Center. We can get rid of our formula test sheet, and we'll get rid of this metadata sheet as well. We got a couple of them open here. And we'll test it on our third project again. So we're going to say apply test. And so now all the changes we made on our base template sheet are now all going to pull over into our project dashboard. Okay, so we have our global update running. It's taking our number 3 project, and it's just basically going to go through and say, all right, based on the template and how the template's connected, we're going to apply those changes to this project. Now, a couple of things, if your template is changed or your Control Center blueprint, you changed how that architecture works, and it's different from your older projects, then you might run into errors. But if you're adding something or making modifications and the path that input-output connection is relatively the same, or if it is modified, it's modified via global update or some other change, then you should have no issues changing the dashboard and doing some bigger revisions. Obviously, this one's a smaller revision, adding the risk flag. But as you can see, it pulls through to our third project. Again, this is our test to make sure it works. Looks good, fonts updated, risk box shows up. So we can close that out. We can confirm it that it worked. And we can apply the update. And again, we can also allow a partial update as well, meaning that, hey, if there's some things that aren't working and there's some connections that aren't, it will either stop it and say, hey, we didn't update it because we don't want anything to break, or if you know there's some changes that you want to see that you still want to be applied, even if there are some things that either may break or just may not be updated during the global update, you can do those as well. Okay, so now it's going to go through, update our 2 active projects, number 2 and 3. And you can see with number 2, hey, we got some errors on a burn down chart for a widget because there's multiple rows with a primary value. So again, if there are other charts or assets that might have changed from one project to the next in the template, again, you might see some errors pop up there. But if we go look at these projects, we'll go look at both of them, and there should be no issues. So we can see our risk flag, again, the style, because it was an older project, we would just have to change the style in metadata, which is something global update can't do currently. But everything else is pulling through as we had it, both for our second project and our third. All right. So the only 2 global updates we haven't covered, modifying existing columns. Again, those ones are pretty straightforward. I'll show it off quickly. We won't actually build this one in the interest of time, but these ones are a little bit simpler. You pick your column that you want to edit. So if I wanted to change the checkbox, this is where I can go in and change the symbol. So you kind of have to do 2 global updates. If you add a column, it doesn't let you pick the same symbol right now. But if you modify it, you can go in and say, yeah, here are the changes I want to make as a visual symbol. Again, it's a little confusing, checkbox symbols, depending on where they're added, but you can make some of those changes. And then you can pick values from the list as well. So you can see our formula show up from the template as well. Even if we wanted to move a column that existed and kind of rearrange some things, you can do a global update. It is 1 column at a time right now, so just be wary of that. And then if we wanted to update a report, same thing, let's say our timeline report, and we wanted to update the sources as well of that report. Again, another report that's going to look back at the template, and then whatever's in your template, it'll apply those changes to the template to the existing reports. So if the sources have changed, if the column layout has changed, if the filter criteria has changed, again, that'll all be rooted back in the source template. Okay, so that is it. Control Center, all of it, from start to finish. Blueprints, global updates, automations, archiving. Again, integration specifically is for resource management by Smartsheet, but everything you need to know to build it out. If you were going to do a multi-tier Control Center solution, just to take it 1 level higher, if you're not using Portfolio WorkApps, you can do something where you daisy chain or connect the blueprints together, where you have a parent and a child, meaning that every time you have 1 blueprint provision, the roll up or output then goes up to the parent level of a blueprint, which can then go up higher. So you can either have a staircase chain of projects. So you have blueprint 1, blueprint 2, and so on. Or you can have, blueprint 1, 2, and 3, and 2 and 3 are at the same level. So you can either staircase it down or kind of tree it out. Right. So hopefully that's helpful. One last thing I want to share just in terms of the value side. Hopefully there's a lot of ideas turning about what's possible with Control Center, the power, the automation, the simplicity of just the end user experience, is that this main level dashboard, as we roll all this information up, we can really build this into a powerful user experience where the user comes to this dashboard, they can access their projects, provide their updates, make quick changes, and then get out of the system and focus on whatever the business organization does on the day-to-day. So I know this has been a long video. Appreciate everyone hanging in there. I have one last kind of value add for everyone. And so what we're going to do is we have a report, and this report is just standalone, lives outside the system, out of ControlCenter. We're going to convert this into a dynamic view. And so I'm going to leave the name the same, not going to change the description, not going to change the viewership. I will allow new submissions that will go directly to intake. And we're going to let user displays attachments and comments. And we're just going to add some quick value adds. And we'll add phase in here as well. All right, so if those who aren't familiar with Dynamic View, it's really just a great way to look at different project information and pull up key data points, make quick changes, just view things, not so much in the typical spreadsheet form, and just kind of quickly enact on some decisions. So again, we're just going to put a few data points in here. Again, you can just add them. You can drag and drop these fields in here. For some of these, I'm just going to make some quick changes on different views. And we're going to save this and go back to this view. So Dynamic View gives us a way to see all of our project data in one place. We can dynamically sort some of this information. We can add filters. So if I wanted to call this active only, and say phase is not one of archive, for instance, I can apply a filter to filter down my data, and I can have multiple shared filters. If I share it, this means anyone accessing it can access the same filter, or we could do some current user filtering. But when I click on these rows, I get a detail panel where I can view attachments, add comments for collaboration just on the project record itself. Quick links to the dashboard. I can add my summary or like status updates through here as well. It's an update for today, and so on. I can update hours. And all of these changes get applied to our sheet. I can wrap text on if I need more information or bigger rows to view this information. And what I can do with this, we're going to go back to the source sheet for that one. What I can do is edit my dashboard and pull in a web content widget and pull this dynamic view right into my report. So now, only with ControlCenter, information is automatically adding my core Smartsheet assets, and then I can use other key premium applications within Smartsheet like Dynamic View to take advantage of, again, dynamically sorting data, getting out detail panels to quickly provide updates, like status updates, from a dashboard level. When I make these changes up here, those changes not only sync directly to this row, they will sync directly to my project templates as well. So if I'm doing something top-down, information will fill in down into my template, or if I'm doing information within my template, it'll roll up to my highest level view. And so it's not just Dynamic View, it can also be for applications like Calendar app. And so if I want to take my project information and really scale this at a high level, I can go in pull my sheet. I can pick a view where I want to see data. So let's say multi-month view. I can say what my task name is. Well, in this case, I'm looking at the project level. But again, if we wanted to pull a dynamic scope report and look at it at a task level to see what key tasks or milestones are hitting on a calendar, I can roll it up for a calendar view. And then we'll just pick update date. And again, if I want to know who the owner is. I can pull project manager over. And if I want to group this data by different categories, like phase, for instance, I can do different groupings. And if we look at advanced settings, if I want that same detail panel of information to be displayed, again, we'll pick a few detail points here. And let's do a specific date. Let's look at January 1st. Let's look at a 6-month reporting period. And let's color our columns by phase. And again, we can see we can pick different tile views. And we'll just do colored filled. And again, we can change our quarter start month, our calendar name, if we want to ignore weekends, if we want to look at a 454 calendar, if we want to invert it. Again, a whole slew of items we can do. So I'm going to turn on invert to start. Actually, I'll leave invert off. Turn it on later. So we're going to add a new calendar. And we're going to go back to our summary. Okay, so we're going to add some dates in there. All right, so we can see our projects pulling up. We can see the PM pulling up as well, and then those update dates that we selected. So they show up in the calendar. You can see discovery, so projects were part of different discovery timelines. We can dynamically turn off those sections. And then we can open up a detail panel and then make changes to those details from here as well. So if I wanted to say it's going to be in this time period, we can make those updates. Those updates automatically apply to our calendar. And then we can invert it as well if we wanted to see our time vertically and then see our categories for phases go left from right. Or if we wanted to look at a just a monthly view, and we can see month over month where these projects show up in the calendar. Then same thing. We can go back to our main dashboard. Put in a new web content widget. Put in a new calendar link. And then save this over. Okay, and then whatever viewer setting we want, we can change the default. So if we want to see like which day of the month these things are hitting, or if we want to view it by week to see what's hitting this week, again, all these settings can be made within the calendar, and then they can be dynamically updated via the calendar app. So again, Control Center, pulling in, automatically updating sheets, reports, dashboards, pulling into other premium applications to truly scale these solutions even further. So with that said, I know this was a long one. I don't know if I'll ever do it again because it was so long. Side note, dynamic view, you can add new rows directly from here, so you don't have to use a form. You can just use dynamic view to add it. Obviously, a lot of this can be resized as well. But with that being said, thank you so much for watching. Remember, like, comment, subscribe. Hopefully this provided a ton of value. I mean, this is Control Center from start to finish. If you need help with Control Center, if you just have questions, drop a comment. We'll have links in the description below where you can reach out to me directly. You can reach out to Workspace Solutions, visit our website, and be happy to help you in any way that we can. But yeah, I think this is a big area in the space with Control Center that's missing. And so we wanted to just share this knowledge with everyone. Like I said, our mission for 2025 is delivering exceptional value for everyone, not just our large enterprise clients, but anyone who may not have large enterprise budgets to help move their business forward. So thanks for hanging in there. Hope you enjoyed it. And if you are interested, we are doing a 100% money back guarantee. It's called the Honest Aid Promise. Check it out on our website if you want to learn more, but pretty cool. Something we're doing because we truly do believe in this product and the other products we consult on. And we put our money where our mouth is. And so if you feel this is beneficial for your organization, if you feel that having something delivered in less than 12 weeks, again, usually 6 to 8 weeks is when these solutions for us actually deploy, I don't know how long I've been going, probably 2-3 hours worth. If this is what we can do in 2 to 3 hours, just think what we can do on a more complex solution. Again, we can deliver probably within 4 weeks, depending on what your build is. So if interested, again, links will be in the description below. If you wanted to learn more about other Smartsheet projects, there should be another video on Data Shuttle dropping along with this one, going through a different tool. That video is a lot shorter, so enjoy that one. But with that, like I said, hope this was helpful. Appreciate the time. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you all in the next one. Take care.